HIPcast is brought to you by Enterprise Social Record, and welcome to. I never do the intro, so I'm immediately awkward in the immediately failing at the job here. But welcome to HIPcast. This is episode 65 of HIPcast, and it's a fun conversation because we don't have a guest. Normally at HIPcast we have a guest, we highlight an HI professional, but sometimes it's just Shannon and I just talking about a topic that is a hot topic in the world. And you know, the fascinating thing, our sister channel, Primo Perspective, with Kristen and who I call Mississippi, but her name's Lorie, but I call her Mississippi. They threw a topic at us from their episode that posted last week, which is kind of a fascinating thing to do. Now we get to sort of have this talk back and forth between our podcasts. So today we are going to talk about the potential, maybe the change that KHIM is throwing out there around credentialed instructors inside of KHIM accredited programs. So Shannon has a lot more information on this than I do. I just have opinions on whatever people say to me. But I did listen to Kristen and Lorie when they did their episode on this. And, you know, Kristen's an educator, so she spent a lot of time in that space. And she's got a very strong and valid opinion as an educator. Mississippi has been on the speaking circuit for a long, long time and is a seasoned HIM person, so she's got a great opinion as well. But we're going to talk about that today from our perspectives, Shannon. So I'm going to start out and just ask you, what is going on? What is being considered? What's being thrown out there? And then we'll just sort of rap about what that looks like.
Well, first of all, I think it is adorable that you got really dressed up today just so that you could do the intro.
Hey, and then I totally failed on it. Yeah. That's so what happens when I'm not in the traditional male quarter zip of uniforms.
Yes, and then I only have on a blouse. I didn't get the memo that I needed to wear a blazer, so I don't have a collar or a blazer. So it is just, you know, that. So it's really interesting, the things that are changing and all of the different components or the external forces that are impacting our credentials today. And, you know, I want to set this up maybe by saying in the beginning, let's talk about where, you know, probably 15, 20, maybe 20 years ago now, maybe it was 15, the Medicare conditions of participation removed the requirement to have an HIM credentialed manager or director in the health information department. And it's a piece of legislation, right? I no longer require you to have a credentialed health information professional leading your medical records department or your health information department. Well, we lobbied against that, as a profession should lobby against that, because that has direct ties to our profession. And an RHIT and an RHIA credential are, you know, our two top tier credentials. And the reason I'm bringing this up is, as we move through this conversation today about the presence or absence of credentials in our educational programs that are preparing the next generation of health information management professionals, I just want you to remember I just want you to always think about how today's decision can impact and should impact the future. And so as it stands today, there are many health information or medical record departments that are not led by health information professionals. So number one, that had a negative impact. The CMS removal of that from the conditions of participation for a hospital, that had a negative impact on our profession. Seth, do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think it was one of the beginning stages for and I could be totally wrong because I don't live in this space, but I think it was one of the beginning stages for revenue cycle to be separated out of the HIM department and put under finance. Now, they've obviously been tied together at the hip for quite some time, but with that credentialed requirement being removed, people started just easily saying, well, yeah, you can take rev cycle to finance. We'll outsource the ops side of the HIM department. And now we're starting to see things go away. And that was something that we should have fought harder on. I don't know why we didn't absolutely go down kicking and screaming. I don't even remember that fight. And I was probably
you were probably active in that time.
Yeah. And that's the problem, is I don't even remember it, that it was being removed from the conditions of participation. So that's a problem. It's sad. I think it was the beginning of, the I don't want to say the end, but it was the beginning of the decline of our profession being in there. What I do remember from that time is a large group of people saying, we need a seat at the table and we need to be a C something O. And I kept thinking, why do we have to be a C something O? Why don't we be the best at what we're doing? And then apparently in the middle of that, while we're trying to be more than we are, perhaps, I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't be C something O's, but we lost sight, and now we're dealing with the consequences of it. And now it seems as if we're about to go through it again.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I do think there is, in today's world with AI and data content and structure and governance in the way that it is today, I do think this is probably the most opportune time for us to be a CXO, right? Because of data governance and stewardship. Like the more, in my opinion, I've said this to you many times, besides human capital, besides humans, data is the most important asset that we have in healthcare. And we are those professionals. And so at this point, we should be in the executive level discussions on strategy around the data strategy for organizations going forward. So
strategy and governance. I think those are the two
absolutely.
terms. That's where we live.
That's where we live. Absolutely. So, so the current conversation, so I brought that history up because today's conversation is about the credentials of a person, of the folks in our programs who teach the students in the next generation of professionals. And so I don't know if you've seen it, but you can go to KHIM's website and look at the proposed changes. KHIM does something a little different. They post these things out there, and there's a first comment period, and then KHIM takes that information in, prepares that, puts it back out for a second comment period. I don't know when that second comment period is, and the first comment period has already closed. It closed on April the 20th. And I don't know for sure when that second comment period is coming. But essentially, this proposed change would, it's not a lot of language change, but it does keep a program director for these health information programs. It keeps a credentialed person as the director of the program, but it doesn't require it of the staff, or maybe it requires it of one staff, full-time staff, but not the others. So it's starting to diminish the number of credentialed professionals that we're having in our programs, and have all kinds of personal feelings about that, for sure. Like, if we're not even requiring that someone credentialed teach our future professionals, then what value really are our credentials? We all have those conversations. I mean, we've said so many times for the last 12 to 15 years, if you can't even hire a credentialed person to lead our organization, what kind of value do you have as an association for our credentials? And so those are all personal things. But the reality and the impact, you can just look back at the conditions of participation removal of the credential to see what that actual impact is. And so when my personal impact or my personal response here comes out, it's tied to experience. It is not just, it's an experiential impact. It is not just because I want us to have the best. I want us to have our place. It is not just about that. It is that I've seen diminishing returns on our credentials that could have started with that condition of participation change. And so there are a lot of things that are necessary, and we do need to consider this. So I'm not even upset that we're considering what is the impact here. So I'll tell you how I think this came about. Before I do, Seth, do you have any comments or questions about what I said?
No, I think your comments are appropriate for where we are at this point. I hope people go in there and comment in the second period when that's open. It's just the storm that we've been in, from losing the requirement of having the credentialed person in the department to the chaos that our association nationally has been in for the past, I don't know, I'll say decade. And then this just seems like another body punch to the profession. And I want to be positive because we do have students that listen to this, and we have a lot of young professionals, and there's a humongous place for us as professionals in the industry. And the credentials are very positive. The education is very good.
Mm-hmm.
But what are we doing for the future of our profession by continuing to dilute it?
Yeah, and let's be clear about the separation here, because this wasn't an AHIMA driven comment period, right? This new language change, proposed language, it doesn't come from AHIMA. It came from CAHIM. But now let me explain where CAHIM, who their customers are. Who do they answer to? Who do they serve? They serve the associations that they're connected to. So they do serve AHIMA. They serve the members of this organization. They serve employers and employer groups who care about the profession and people that do this work, right? About us as professionals in the workforce. And then also the schools. So there are multiple segments of the industry that are impacted by what happens with credentials and with the criteria around what does it take to be qualified to sit for a credential of any certain type, right? And so CAHIM is responding to external either pressures or responses or requests from someone in their segmentation of clients. So this wasn't just born of CAHIM saying, I think I'm going to go mess with the HEMA members today. Yeah. It was someone brought this to them from one of those segments and said, hey, and I think it might have been schools, because it's challenging to get credentialed full-time staff because academia does not pay well. And so you take a seasoned person that can teach those courses that we require credentials for. They're not very eager most of the time to walk away from, $100,000 to $150,000 salary to go to whatever school pays. And that's varied based on the role and the school and the state and, 2 years, 4 years, whatever it is. So it's hard to get professionals that are credentialed to be full-time staff or faculty, full-time faculty. And so that is a challenge. So I just want to be clear, this was not an AHIMA-driven conversation. And it wasn't even CAHIM initiated, but CAHIM has to respond to their clients, right? So anything you want to add about those or thoughts about that? That's a lot of conversation there.
No, I think your comments are very good, because it is a good place to say that this is not anybody formally coming after the HI professionals or the credentials itself. This is two separate organizations, the association, CAHIM being the accrediting body, and CAHIM responding to a group that, if it did come, and I don't know where it came from, but I think you're right. If it did come from the education side saying, hey, we're struggling to get instructors that will do this full time, that's probably a very valid ask on their part, because they're going to have to find somebody to do these things and to teach. I taught as an adjunct at several community colleges and university. And it's a tough environment. I ended up backing away from it because, I mean, the students were tough to deal with. And I've got a full-time job and a family, and I've got students that were in a program that they couldn't even do basic function in Excel. And then when perfect example that pretty much ended it for me, I had a student that couldn't do basic things in Excel. So I went to YouTube, found a very good instruction video that sort of walked them through the basics of Excel and how to put formulas together and to do formatting and those type of things, and said, here, go watch this video. This will be a very good thing. The student turned me into the dean and said that I refused to help and just started sending out YouTube videos.
Oh, goodness.
And I'm like, I spent the time going out there and trying to find you the right thing, the way to do this. And I mean, I was just done. I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to do it. So I'm at fault as a credentialed HI professional by not going and participating in that world anymore, because it was a pain in the rear end. And I get it. So I think what you said is very good and very clear, that this is not an attack on anybody's part. This is a conversation that's being brought forward from multiple entities of probably a very valid problem. The question that I have, or the fear that I have, is, all right, what are the ramifications of this?
Yeah.
Much longer term. Yes, I understand the current situation. Yes, I understand that the request is there and you have to respond. But are we looking at this 10, 15 years down the road, just like what we did when we lost the requirement in the conditions of participation? What's it going to look like in 15 years?
Exactly. And it doesn't have to come from a place of malicious intent to have a negative impact, right? So I think it's so important that we consider all of these things. But I mean,
say that last statement again. It doesn't
have to come from malicious intent to have negative impact.
I'm going to record that. I'm going to provide that to my family physician when he says that I've gained too much weight. It was not malicious intent that I ate all of those cupcakes, but it did have a negative impact.
Exactly that. It still has to be discussed. I mean, every change that we make has an impact, and it could be positive, it could be negative, it could have some of both, right? Most changes have a positive and a negative impact. So it doesn't have to come from malicious intent. And I want to make sure that we're not disparaging KHIM or AHIMA in this conversation. But we are stating the reality.
Big fans and friends of the KHIM folks. Yeah. And I'll even say our relationship with AHIMA has changed quite a bit over the past year. Like we're growing, warming up to them. It takes a little time for us to get over the hump, but we're warming up.
Well, and I think too, at the end of this conversation, I do want to talk about some, what AHIMA's response to this kind of thing might be. And I think those could potentially be really positive. So I've got some notes here. I'm going to, pardon me while I look down and read. So there's also, I was unaware of this, but there is currently in some legislation, or maybe an executive order from the president. I don't know exactly where this lives. However, there is a legislative push federally to consider and review all of the credentials that we have in our country and determine, do we really need this credential? So really? There is also, in addition to our own market and how we're moving in the market and what's being required and what our barriers are to achieve the things that we've set up as qualifications for these credentials, there's also a legislative, hey, is this a necessary thing? Does this really have value? And you may have to justify that value. So there's even a legislative component that, I mean, a lot of these educational requirements and criteria has been in existence for a really long time. This is as long as we've been in the profession. Mm-hmm. But just generally speaking, there is an element of legislation tied to this. And so now there's a consideration, do we have to have this? And if so, show me why. So KHIM is even facing that challenge.
My immediate reaction to that was negative, but then my the other part of my brain, the left side and the right side, and they're arguing, are the two little folks on the shoulders that are back and forth arguing. My first reaction was negative. My second reaction to that is I wonder what the motivations behind that are, because it could be that the credentials, now take away credentials that require a degree, but there could be a focus on credentials to help people get into the workforce faster without having to go to a 2 or 4 year degree path to get a credential.
Possibly.
And that could be a huge positive for a lot of young people that are looking at, do I want to go $150,000 in debt to go to school, or do I want to just go work on a credential, a boot camp, or whatever to get into the workforce? There could be a positive that comes out of it.
There could be. And some of the conversations that we've had, you and I've had with Sharon Easterling and just some different folks in this space is there a way to kind of stack some credentials into the degree program so that when a person comes out, they have these either micro credentials or some of the lower level credentials that could get them working while they are waiting on testing for the RHIT or RHI exam. And so I think that's a smart move to be considering how can we get the workforce trained in a particular technical component to get them in the workforce faster. And how does that change our educational tracks? You know, and I think that's important to consider too. Let's see. Any other comments on this before?
No, I think I interrupted you before you were going to your notes.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to go back to them. But so basically, high level, this change would keep the program director for these schools in place, but it would remove the requirement for having full-time faculty be credentialed by AHIMA's credentials. And I can't remember if that's 1 or 2. I don't know if they retain one of the full-time staff with that. So one of the challenges in the schools is if I tell my dean, well, these requirements have changed and now I only have to have one credentialed person, and that's program director, and otherwise I can hire anyone, then that program is likely to get some dollars removed from their budget, because now I can hire somebody that isn't credentialed, and that that has a negative impact on the program as well. So there's so many veins of impact downstream that could really hurt not only our profession, but also the programs. Some programs might not be able to continue if they're not able to have the dollars to fund their programs. So what are your thoughts on that?
I wonder about AHIMA's response to that, because you assume that if that occurs, think again, we're going downstream here. If that occurs to where you have instructors that are not credentialed, they're not promoting the credential, they're not promoting membership with AHIMA, that's going to eventually flow down to a continued reduction in membership, which is a continued dilution of the association, which then goes down to the state level, which we're interested in. So this is going to have some long-term effects here that probably aren't going to be the most positive.
Yeah. And just nothing has happened yet. They have not made any of these changes yet. So this is just trying to inform so that you can go out when there is a comment period and consider the changes and consider the impact and determine how do you want to respond to that, if you want to respond at all. Seth, that's a perfect segue into some of the real talk. We've kind of laid out the history, the current state of things and the segments that KHIM serves. So let's have some real talk about, what could this mean, whether negative or positive? What could this mean for us as a profession and for AHIMA as an association and for AHIMA as a business? So some things I wrote down because I wanted to make sure I didn't forget to say these things. Our relationships have been strained. So KHIM and AHIMA have had strained relationships for the past 3 years or so. Mm-hmm. I think those are slightly on the mend, but still unsteady, maybe. And I apologize to any of you in those organizations if that is still untrue, but it seems that they're still trying to find their way back. Yeah, right? My perception is they're trying to find their way back to that cohesive relationship that they had before, and I don't think it's quite there. Also, the relationship between AHIMA and members have been strained for quite a long time, and AHIMA and the CAs, but that is, as you stated earlier, we have made tons of forward progress in that relationship, and we can, I have hope we can move this forward together. Maybe Absolutely. For the first time in a long time, you and I both have discussed this just separately off air. This is important, and feels like we can go forward. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that AHIMA has now hired, again, credentialed professionals who are leading us in practices, right? In communities of practice kind of manner that makes an impact. And so it gives us that hope. So we've got some strained relationships. And also, I don't know how many of us are aware, how many members or interested parties are aware, but AHIMA has their own criteria as well. So KHIM has all the things that they have for this credentialed, but AHIMA has competencies as well that are developed independently of KHIM. And I'm sure, I know you know that, but there are probably a lot of people that don't realize that. Okay. So let's talk about what happens in a future kind of setting, knowing that AHIMA has their criteria for credentials or the competencies, and also understanding our world today where virtual education is almost a requirement. And even our programs that are still in a school, a lot of them are remote or hybrid. So
it's an interesting thing you just sparked in my mind there.
Okay, hang on. I'm going to give you one more piece of that.
Okay.
We have our own AHIMA has their own competencies. They do virtual education. It's just not program level, but they also have HC Pro. Is this an opportunity for AHIMA to become its own educational delivery system for credentialed health information professionals? And if so, will they seize that opportunity?
Ooh.
See, I told you I was going to say something fun.
Yeah. I mean, there's two things there that pops out. Obviously, that last one's kind of the big one, the big cannonball in the pool, which I can do. I'll hit the first piece, though, that the thing that I was going to mention that is interesting. So in the states, to provide education, the CAs and even the locals and regionals, depending on their affiliation agreements, are being audited now on the education that they provide. And part of that audit is the structure of the education, the domains that falls in, and are you putting in, is the speaker qualified to speak in that domain? Now, the speaker qualifications isn't incredibly defined. It's still a bit to where we can make a judgment call of whether or not that person is there. They sort of have to do an attestation that they are qualified to speak in that. But there are quite a bit of hoops that we're having to jump through now in the CA space to make sure that we're providing good education for our members. Not saying that's good or bad.
Right.
You know, it's tough for those of us that don't have full-time staff working in the so Aretha at Tennessee, you know, she jumps through those hoops and has to manage that whole thing, and she does a great job at it. But it's a consideration, because all of a sudden we're having to figure out, all right, make sure we have all these ducks in a row, and we try to lean into credentialed presenters because of that, because it is a specific domain space. That requirement is not the same for the instructors out in the academia space. They're not they're not having to go through a similar process from AHIMA. You know, KHIM will go through and do an accreditation of the program as a whole, but not necessarily the down level to that piece.
That's true.
So that was the first thought that I'm like, all right, we're already starting to see a little bit of a separation in how things are done from an education pre and post graduation, I guess I'll say, or pre and post credential. But then you throw in the big one, which is, could HC Pro become that education arm? And that would be detrimental to the education programs out there that are part of public institutions or private institutions, because then that changes, and
it changes significantly. And here's the question: is that good or bad? And I have to really consider. I mean, there's, like we said earlier, there's negative and positive, right? There's pros and cons for all of this, but if that happens, if you're going to have a credential, if you're going to keep a credential and maintain that credential is important, then you're going to get it from that virtual school, right? And you're going to be able to say, everyone will know that training is the same across the whole country.
Right.
This person was trained against this criteria, and in this manner, the program, I mean, you're turning out, there's a lot to be said. I mean, if you're not teaching well, you're turning out garbage, future employees. But I don't think that that's the case. But there are a lot of, is that good or bad, Seth? What do you think?
There's positives and negatives to it. The negatives are, well, dadgummit, we went to school and we don't want anything to change. And there's value in that undergrad and associates and baccalaureate level education.
But the rigor would be the same. I'm suggesting that they have their university levels.
They have their university level, but it's not the same expense and challenge. So, as my girls are about to both be in they're heading towards high school. So, we're having conversations about, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go to college? Do you want to go to college? And I don't remember having that choice of, do you want to go to college? It was, you go to college. The market's shifting now.
Oh, so much.
It's so expensive to go to a school. I was talking with a gentleman earlier that is from New England, sent both his kids to the South to college. And, they're roughly $250,000 in by the time they get 4 or 5 years into a out-of-state tuition plus room and board and everything else. That's a huge investment times 2 when you have 2 kids. And I'm sitting there going, is it worth me spending $250,000 for them to go to an institution and go through the full thing? To what? To what extent? When hospitals aren't required to have credentialed people.
Right.
The educators aren't even required to have credentialed people.
Well, they still are. Now. They still are.
But, trying to add a little bit of a oomph to that point there. But, it's like, if I could say, hey, you're interested in healthcare and you just want this credential to get started somewhere, and then you can sort of figure out where your path goes, as we've talked in this program a lot, is it's a journey. Hey, you can go to this boot camp, you can go to our association, get this credential and get in and start working and figure out where your life takes you. That's a positive to get more people into the fold here. It's really, a negative towards the programs.
It is. And so I look at this as the virtual school, AHIMA's virtual school. And AHIMA has never told me they're doing this. I have no idea if they've ever thought about it. So please don't think that I'm saying AHIMA's going to launch a school, because that is not what I'm saying.
But if they do, they can license us to promote it.
Right. Right. You pay me for the advertisement. No, but in response, my question is, if KHIM does change that requirement because it fits in the market, does AHIMA respond by having their own education at a university level education, essentially? Yeah. And then they've set the qualifications. They have the competencies that would qualify someone to take a certification exam, right? And have a credential. So I'm just saying, if KHIM does make those changes and it starts to have a negative impact on programs across the country, would AHIMA respond in a way to fill that gap? I'm not suggesting that AHIMA take this away from programs.
And they probably should,
I think they could. And I think that I just want to, I kind of want to make a point of clarification. I still think it would be rigorous, like, all right, you did a doctorate online. I did a doctorate hybrid. And so I went to campus 3 times a year in South Carolina. But the rest of the time we were doing very rigorous work with a ton of assignments. So I'm not thinking boot camp, Seth. I'm thinking online college.
Yeah.
So I want to just clarify that it's like, I'm talking real rigor here. And, but I like what you're saying about having someone in the workforce faster. You could design that online university in a manner that allows for synchronous and asynchronous, depending on the course. I think coding classes should never be asynchronous because coding is hard. And I know you weren't teaching coding when you were doing adjunct.
Nope.
But I don't think it should be synchronous because there are too many caveats. And so be asynchronous. So once that person has completed, coding 1 and coding 2, whatever it is, revenue cycle stuff, then they transition into that second year where they can be working on working asynchronously and working if they so choose, right? Because a lot of us are less traditional students and more contemporary, and maybe we want to go to work and do school, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if a HEMA would, or even if they could, like, are they even allowed?
HC Pro's a separate entity.
Yeah. So then it becomes HC Pro University instead of a HEMA. Like, that might get a little confusing. But anyway, I just think it's fun to dream. You know what I mean? I just think it's fun to consider, how would we respond and how would a HEMA respond,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's all about bringing information to the members, and that's what we're doing here. And as we kind of have to tie a bow on this, I think that's the key. Go out there. If you're interested in this, some of our members may not even care, and that's okay. But you probably should care. Go out there, make a comment in the negative or positive, because that's going to help KHIM make an appropriate decision and an informed decision of what the future should look like. The reality is the market's changing. The reality is our profession is changing, and these things are going to continue to come up. And we've got to make sure that we are sharing our opinion. And if we're appropriately sharing our opinion, then that's okay. You're part of the process. But if you refuse to act, then, well, you get to live with the results of whatever that is, whether it's positive or negative. So go out there, look for the KHIM website, look for the comment period, reach out to your local schools and instructors, talk to them about it and see what their opinions are. Comment below. Hey, people see these things, and we'll talk about them and go from there. So I think, Shannan, I appreciate you bringing this to us and having a great conversation about it. I think it's good for folks to hear.
I love it. It's I don't necessarily love all the possible negative impacts, but I do love the conversation and informing our members, because this is important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, shout out to Primo Perspective and Kristen and Lorie for throwing this at us as a topic. It's kind of fun to do that. So shout out to them. Shannan, till next time, my friend.
I'll see you next time, buddy.